So when I want to describe for people what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, I usually point out our first and seventh principles as two pillars, two opposite poles of our faith. The first principle affirms the inherent worth and dignity of each and every person. And the seventh principle affirms that we, each and every one of us, are part of an interdependent web of existence. Together, these two present the paradox of our faith: individuality, independence, versus relationship, interdependence. On the one hand, the first principle asks us to consider what is unique and singular about each of us. On the other hand, the seventh principle asks us to consider the ways that we are interconnected, the ways that we are linked in what Reverend Martin Luther King called the inescapable network of mutuality, a single garment of destiny. How do we hold these two conflicting and yet complementary principles, our individuality and the diversity that flows from that, and our sameness, which binds us together? I recognize the challenge here, right now especially, in a world, in a political climate, not just in this country, but around the globe, where we are more divided than ever. There is a longing to hold on to cling to the ways that we are alike and connected. And yet this longing to cling to the things that hold us together, this longing often slides into what Audre Lorde described as a refusal to even acknowledge our differences, a fear of approaching our differences with rigor and seriousness. I want to talk first about the fear, because it is not insignificant. I hear in this fear a real tenderness, a real wariness about getting it wrong or not knowing how to get it right. Sometimes this is expressed as laughing at the expectation that we talk and behave in ways that are sensitive to those around us. Sometimes it is expressed as being confounded by the changes in language, the changes in the very terms that we use to identify ourselves and others. We don't want to be called out as racist or sexist or ableist or classist or just plain wrong. We don't want to be wrong. I get that. It can feel as if we are navigating a shifting landscape, a rapid revolution, too rapid. How can we keep up with this world changing so swiftly around us? I grew up, not that long ago, but long enough, in a time when African American was a polite way to describe my race. And then people of color to describe a more inclusive identity. And then Black to suggest a more politically affirmative identity. And now, all of a sudden, within a year, everyone is using BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Unless, of course, we're talking about Latinx people with an X, no longer simply Latino or Latina or even Hispanic. Growing up gay and lesbian were appropriate terminology. More recently, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And now, LGBTQI+. A decade ago, differently abled felt like a politically correct, or at least a polite, way to refer to people who are disabled. And now our disabled siblings are telling us something different. They tell us that this and other alternatives can feel disempowering, patronizing, and hurtful. Euphemisms like challenged, handy-capable, differently abled, and special needs only serve to mask the speaker's discomfort with difference. And while these euphemisms may make people who are not disabled feel comfortable, they do nothing to address the ways that our society and our institutions are organized to accommodate certain kinds of bodies and not others. It can be hard to keep up with the language. But the fact is, language matters. Words have power, and they influence the ways that we think about the world around us and the people around us. But this is not only about having the correct words and the correct language. This is about our willingness to change and grow. Our willingness to be vulnerable in our imperfection. It is about our willingness to listen and to follow the lead of directly impacted people. At its most basic, it is about respect. Our language always been and is always changing. The question is, are we willing and able to change with it? Are we willing and able to make the effort to try and see others and to acknowledge our differences with openness and curiosity? Openness and curiosity, and not fear. Are we willing to be, as activist Mary Hookes mandates, transformed in the service of the work? I think that willingness comes from love. And when I talk about love here, I mean the fierce love that Reverend King talked about. He said, I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about strong, demanding love. The kind of love that King describes as the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. The point is not to be perfect, but to do our best in love, to try with open-heartedness, to enter into relationships, to deepen relationships with the willingness to forgive ourselves and others. I know this is hard work, and I know it feels scary. And some of us, probably you, I know definitely me, sometimes wish that we could return to a time when we knew the rules and we were safe in our expressions and our interactions. But cultural theorist Bell Hooks reminds us that the practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside of our control. I want to say that again because I think it's so important. The practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside of our control. Far too often in our congregations, in our larger faith, I witness the way that we fall into the pitfall that Audre Lorde describes of refusing to acknowledge difference for all sorts of reasons. Because it's hard, because we don't want to feel different, because we want to be polite, because we don't want to say the wrong thing, because we want to recognize the ways that we are the same. I hear things like, we're all the same, or I don't see color, or LGBTXYZ. None of that really matters. Please believe me when I tell you, it matters. It matters when the people around you see you. And it matters when they don't. I think I know what people mean when they say we're all the same. They are pointing to, I think, the sense that we are all human, that there is something about us that connects us, that draws us together in a human family. Or if we're really stretching, together in the family of earth beings, human and non-human alike, our expansive, interdependent web of life. But behind the sentiment, underneath this insistence that we are all the same, is the sense that we need to be the same in order to be able to care about each other, in order to really love each other. My question here is this: do I have to be like you in order for you to love me? Do I have to be like you in order for you to care about me and my life? Can we love each other even if we are different from each other? And again, love here doesn't mean like each other a lot. It doesn't mean want to have me around. It most definitely does not mean appreciate that I bring diversity. I mean that demanding love that King talks about. I mean that love as practice, love as an act that Bell Hooks talks about. She writes, love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. And it implies choice. We do not have to love. We choose to love. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse, love and negligence cannot coexist. Love, back in my words, means that we try to know each other. Love means that we fight for each other. But when I am faced with this refusal to acknowledge difference, the very real differences that mark our lives, that shape our opportunities, that color our access to power and safety, It raises the question, how can I trust you? How can I trust you if you don't see me? If you don't see and understand that my life is constrained and oppressed, how can I trust you if you don't acknowledge the real threat and danger that I face? And even if after I tell you, you still refuse to acknowledge it, instead clinging to the safety of sameness, how can I trust you then to fight against the things that oppress me if you refuse to acknowledge the things that make us different? Race, sex, ability, class, age. If you refuse to acknowledge the things that make our lives different, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, ageism, how can I trust you to have my back and to fight with me against these things? Nobody is asking for perfection. At least people in good faith are not asking for perfection. We're asking for you to try to see each other, try to understand each other, try to know each other, and don't hide behind the impossibility of perfection. This idea that you can't possibly know someone different, and since you can't possibly get it right, why even bother trying? There is a tendency to feel embarrassment or shame when we make mistakes, when we get things wrong, especially when we get things wrong in ways that don't represent who we really believe we are, when we get things wrong in ways that don't represent who we want to be. But there is no room for shame and embarrassment here. The stakes are too high to hide behind that. I have committed myself and my life to Unitarian Universalism because I believe so deeply in our possibility and our promise, in our power to transform the world in big ways and small ways. And I believe that when we unleash this powerful love out onto the world around us, that is beloved community. That is collective liberation. But we can't possibly hope to be a part of healing the fractures in our community and our nation and our world if we can't even heal the fractures at home, if we can't even see them. 40 years ago, Audre Lorde said, I am constantly being encouraged to pluck out some aspect of myself and present this as a meaningful whole, eclipsing or denying other parts of myself. But this is destructive and a fragmenting way to live. My fullest concentration of energy is available to me only when I integrate all the parts of who I am, openly allowing power from different sources of my living to flow back and forth freely through all my different selves, without the restrictions of externally imposed definition. Only then can I bring myself and my energies as a whole to the service of those struggles, which I embrace as part of my living. She challenged us to develop the tools for using human difference as a springboard for creative change within our lives. Friends, I hope I can call you that. The world needs people who are whole, who, like Audre Lorde, can bring ourselves and our energies as a whole to the service of those struggles that we commit our lives to. The world needs people like you who can live fully into ourselves. People who aren't forced to hide or deny parts of themselves in order to honor our connections to each other. We really, really do not have to think alike to love alike. We don't need to ignore our very real and obvious differences in order to realize unity. Rather than ignore differences, we can, as Lorde challenged, develop tools, skills, and capacity for using difference, not to separate us, but as a springboard for creative change within our lives and our communities. With courage and vulnerability, and definitely not perfection, we can write this story together.